Hello everyone and welcome back to the Dork Side. I am the Dork in the Road and today I'm pitting my beloved CRF250L against my equally beloved Suzuki DRZ400S. That's right everyone, I am the Dork in the Road and I want to be your internet writing buddy, so please consider subscribing and don't forget to turn on those notifications so that you know when I post awesome new dual sport and adventure motorcycling content just like this. So when I was first searching for dual sports, two of the most common recommendations that I got were the bikes sitting to my right and to my left, the Honda CRF250L and the Suzuki DRZ400S. Both are great, solid, reliable motorcycles with an excellent reputation, and now that I own both, the question that I get pretty often is which one is better or how do they compare? And so today I'm going to attempt to run down the comparison of features, the pros and cons, and my sort of final verdict as a person who's owned and ridden both of these motorcycles extensively. But first, for those of you who are just trying to decide between the two, here's some basic stats for each bike so you have a good overview of what each one is all about. Let's start with the 250L. So the 250L has a 219cc fuel-injected engine, 6-speed transmission, got an inverted fork with 9.8 inches of suspension travel, and a single shock in the rear with 9.4 inches of suspension travel. The wheelbase is 56.9 inches, seat height 34.4 inches, ground clearance is 10 inches, curb weight is 321.9 pounds, and the fuel capacity is 2.1 US gallons. 24 horsepower, and it retails for $51.99 MSRP. That's the 2020 model. The DRZ, by comparison, has a 398cc 4-stroke engine, single cylinder. They're both single cylinder, both 4 strokes. 5-speed transmission, that's important. It's not fuel injected, it has a Mikuni carburetor. Front suspension, 11.3 inches, not inverted, 11.3 inches of travel. Rear suspension has 11.6 inches of travel. Wheelbase is 58.5 inches. Seat height, 36.8 inches. Ground clearance of 11.8 inches. The curb weight is 317 pounds, so slightly lighter. There's a fuel capacity of 2.6 gallons, 39 horsepower, and MSRP retail is $67.99. Noticeably more expensive, shall we say. Both motorcycles are incredibly capable in my experience. They can handle almost anything you throw at them, be it rocky technical terrain or long highway travel, and I'm not saying they do any of it as good as other bikes that are designed for it, but they, unlike other types of motorcycles, can handle basically everything that you throw at them. Relatively inexpensive as new bikes go or as motorcycles go. You're not looking at Ducati or Husky prices here. Under $7,000 for both bikes new and less than that used, obviously. There's a strong aftermarket for both bikes, lots of parts available, and both have a strong community that is invested and able to help you with your questions. Bad things about both bikes that they share in common: they're relatively uncomfortable. It's not a touring bike and you'll know it the more time you spend in the saddle. They're definitely function over form. Not a lot of stock protection on either bike, so some mods are necessary if you're going to do any off-roading. The CRF in particular comes with a plastic skid plate, which I hesitate to even use the word skid plate. It's like a gravel deflector at best. And they're both pretty heavy for an off-road bike. They're heavier than some of the more expensive European dual sports, and they're definitely a lot heavier than a dirt bike. So that's just something to know and keep in mind. There's a trade-off for that roadworthiness. Work emails. They never stop. Bike-specific pros and cons. Start with the 250L. Pros, first one, obviously, let's just get it out of the way. The elephant in the room, fuel injection. If you want a fuel-injected bike and you're trying to decide between these two, well, you can just go ahead and scratch the DRZ400 off your list. The other big advantage to the 250L is that 6-speed. If you're going to spend any time on the highway, I don't do that a ton, but some people do, that 6th gear is really nice to have. The CRF is cheaper, so that's a big deal, especially if you're trying to save money, get the most bang for your buck, and save some money for some of those essential mods. And the CRF is far more beginner friendly. So if you're talking first bike or first off-road bike, there's a lot to be said for the lower seat height, the less horsepower, the more beginner friendly, mistake friendly, a more forgiving motorcycle while still being very capable. The other big advantage of the CRF250L is that it is a design that is continually updated. They're continually tweaking the design and making it better. The DRZ has not been updated at all in 20 years. It's basically the exact same design as the one that came out in 2000. Cons to the 250L by comparison, a lot less power, and it's definitely noticeable. You're talking 25 horsepower to 40 horsepower. So it's definitely less snappy, less aggressive, less torquey. The suspension in particular is quite different. The suspension on 250L, I have definitely bottomed it out. It's definitely squishier. I've definitely had more trouble with it rebounding, and it's not as adjustable either. You can adjust the preload in the rear gear, and that is it. Also, the CRF is the same weight as the DRZ, but with significantly less power. So that adds to that sluggish, kind of squishy feeling of it, which is not a bad thing if you're a new rider, but the better you get, the more you'll notice it. Pros, let's talk about the DRZ. So advantages to the DRZ. More power, it's very noticeable right away, and more than just horsepower, but torque. It's very torquey, it'll tractor up very steep hills at low RPMs. It's just got a lot more power down low. It's easier to get the front wheel off the ground. It's easier to get a burst of speed when you need it. So if you're at the point where those are things that you want in order to continually improve your riding skills, the DRZ will deliver that. The CRF feels, in my opinion, sluggish by comparison. You also can't underestimate the value of more suspension travel and a better suspension. It is a much better suspension in my experience, and more ground clearance. Things that are going to have you scraping across the skid plate of the CRF, assuming you add one, because the stock one is not going to protect you, you're going to clear easily on the DRZ, and so that just adds up to more capability. Cons for the DRZ, I've already mentioned a couple, but the carburetor, some people really don't like the idea of a carburetor. No 6th gear, you can't underestimate how much of a disadvantage that is if you're going to spend any time on the highway. If you mostly ride in the forest and stuff like I do on trails, it's not a big deal, I don't notice it, but when I get on the highway, you definitely spend your time trying to shift it into 6th gear. I do that a lot. The seat height can be a little intimidating for new riders. It's definitely a little bit taller, a little bit more unwieldy feeling. I remember sitting on one when I was shopping for my first motorcycle and thinking, I can't get my feet down, this is impossible. It's something that I realized is less of a big deal than I thought as my skills improved, but at first it was very intimidating and I didn't like it, it concerned me. Finally, a con unique to the DRZ400 is the engine cases are made of magnesium and they're notoriously very brittle. So if you're going to spend any time off-road where you might drop the bike, you're basically required to add extra protection to the bike if you're going to do any off-road in the form of case savers. I've got an install video for those if you're curious. They're not expensive, anywhere from 16 to 50 bucks, but it's definitely a con with this bike that you don't get with the 250L because it doesn't have those brittle magnesium cases. So my thoughts on each bike as a person who's owned and ridden them. My 250L, I love it. I love this motorcycle. If I could go back in time and whisper in the ear of me back in 2016 when I was buying my first bike, I would have told myself unequivocally to get a CRF250L. Not just because I eventually moved into primarily off-road riding, and it's a great bike for that, but because it's a very easy to ride, forgiving motorcycle for a new rider. And the proof is in the fact that I've moved my 13-year-old daughter to it. She's now riding this motorcycle. We sold her CRF110. So it is the motorcycle I chose to teach her how to use a clutch and ride a bigger full-size bike on. So that's pretty telling in terms of how I feel a new rider can handle it. It's incredibly reliable, very unintimidating. This bike, it'll start up and go every time. You never have to worry about it. It'll last you forever. It's a tank. I've dropped it 10,000 times. Maybe not that much, but a lot of times. She's dropped it a few times, and I always know that when I turn that key, it's just gonna go. And it'll get you anywhere you need to go. It's plenty capable. It'll do everything any other motorcycle will do, just slower or less comfortably. It's a great all-around bike. It does it all. It can do basically anything that the DRZ400S can do, but it is slower. So that's important to keep in mind. The CRF is not as capable of a motorcycle. It's not as fun, it's not as fast, it's slower, it's sluggish, it's squishy. Capable, reliable, it's a Honda, right? It's boringly reliable, boringly capable. It'll do anything you want it to do, but it probably doesn't do it in a super exciting way. It's pretty heavy. It has a very heavy feel to it, and it's underpowered compared to the weight when you think about it versus the DRZ. Now, as a new rider, did I appreciate that? No, probably not. That's a consequence of my skills improving over the last few years. But ultimately, if we're comparing the two bikes, the Honda is squishier and slower, and you can tell. Now, don't misconstrue this as me saying it sucks. My neighbor is starting his Harley, so this will take a while. Yeah, unlike a Harley, which apparently has idle for 2 hours before you can ride it, the DRZ starts it pretty quickly. I guess I'll pause this while I wait.
2 hours later.
The DRZ is basically everything that the CRF250L is, all of the good parts, but better, just kicked up a notch, improved slightly. Equally reliable, it's a more capable motorcycle owing to the more power, the better suspension, the better ground clearance. The DRZ is a bulletproof classic with a massive massive following, community devoted to it. It's one of the most popular dual sport motorcycles of all time for a reason. The power and seat height can be intimidating for new riders. I don't know, it's not as good a choice for a first motorcycle unless you're exceptionally tall or exceptionally confident or have a lot of street riding or dirt bike riding experience. I would definitely, if you're a newer rider, think more about the CRF. It's just more beginner friendly and more forgiving and a better place to start. There's a lot that could intimidate a new rider on the DRZ. Ask me how I know. I was a new rider intimidated by the DRZ's seat height and power. That's why I didn't start off on it. The price is also a concern. It's more expensive. The two biggest cons are the carburetor. That's a big advantage for the CRF, and the 6th gear. So that's another big plus in the CRF's column. It should be far and away that the DRZ runs away with it, but because of those two factors and because they're so close together in a lot of other areas, it's a tough call. It's not a clear, hard and fast, sort of simple decision to make. This shouldn't be the case based on the stats I just read off to you, but I can tell you as a person who's ridden both motorcycles extensively, the DRZ feels lighter, faster, more maneuverable. The CRF feels top heavy and hard to move around. The DRZ just seems easier to load, unload, ride, pick up, all of that stuff. I don't know why, it shouldn't be true, but that's a feeling. It's not scientific, but in my opinion, it is easier to do all those things on the DRZ. So you've come this far, you've heard the stats, you've heard the pros and cons. You're probably eager for me to just answer the question. How do they compare? Or which motorcycle should you get? Here's a simple test. This is what it all boils down to in my opinion. Picture this. Let me set the scene for you. You're riding down a gravel road. Up ahead, you see a jump. Beyond it, you can see clearly it's flat, easy run out. You can 100% for sure land this jump if you just give it a little speed and hit it on purpose. You can also just ride around it if you choose to and go down your merry way in the forest. So do you hit it or not? If you wouldn't hit it, if you're like, no, I'd never do that. Why would I do that? Unnecessary risk, not my style, not something I'm into. Well, then the CRF250L is probably the bike for you. It'll do everything you ever want it to do. It'll comfortably and reliably get you around the forest, let you go out in the woods and explore. It'll get you there on the highway to the forest. It'll transport you. It'll be more than capable for anything you're going to hit on purpose or might encounter by accident. Now, if you would hit the jump, or you're thinking to yourself, I might someday hit the jump, you might think about the DRZ. It's the more capable, more fun of the two bikes. It's faster, it's got a better suspension, it's got more room to grow, you won't outgrow it as quickly, and if you ever think you'll see yourself getting the wheels of that motorcycle off the ground, either the front on purpose because you're trying to get up over an obstacle, or both because you went off of a drop fast, or you want to take on more technical trail riding, or you want to get deep in the forest and you don't know what you're going to encounter, be it water crossings or hill climbs or whatever, the DRZ is a better bike for you. If none of that stuff appeals to you, or you never want to hit it on purpose, but you want to know you're safe in case you come across something unexpected, the CRF is going to get you there every time. It's a better bike for you. Ultimately, there's a reason that I upgraded. The CRF is not a bad motorcycle, 9 out of 10 in my book, but the DRZ is just everything that this bike is and more for me. The CRF was the perfect bike for the rider that I was when I bought it. The DRZ is the perfect bike for the rider that I am now, and there's no shame in that. Those are my thoughts on how the two compare. I don't think you can go wrong with either bike. I wholeheartedly recommend both bikes. If you're a newer rider, I would say 250L. If you've got some more experience or you're comfortable with a taller bike and you don't mind the carburetor and lack of 6th gear, I would say the DRZ. I know it's kind of a cop-out, but you can't go wrong. Either choice you're going to be happy with. If you have questions about the experience of owning either or both of these motorcycles, please feel free to leave them in the comments. I'd appreciate it if you'd consider hitting that like button. Those likes really make the video more visible and help the channel grow, so thank you very much for that. I appreciate your support, and if you want to give above and beyond support, consider becoming a patron like these fine folks. Thank you, patrons. You're my favorite. But for now, and as always, I just want to say thank you very much for watching, and please do not forget to be excellent to each other. Thank you.